welcome. As you know, we've been running a program on English novel, and a large number of lectures have already been delivered by the team of which I am also a member. And we have covered, let's say, the rise of the novel in the 18th century, its development and growth in the 19th century, and then we are moving on to the 20th century. Today's lecture would be on Virginia Woolf, a writer of fiction. And fiction, as you know, is novel, and she is a novelist of the modern period. And I thought that her distinction as a writer now should be highlighted as something that emerged in the 20th century. Virginia Woolf is a known name. You have on the screen her photograph, and she appears to be a very sensitive woman, not directly looking into the camera, as you can see, and but she is not shy. She is very confident, and in fact, in the early 20th century, she would become a proponent of what can be called feminism, and a great feminist writer. She brought about a radical change in the way fiction was to be written and told to the audience. Let's have a look at her concerns in the 19th century, when she was born, and when she evolved as a child into a young woman. She was born in 1882, and she was born in London, England, and she belonged to the upper class. What was important in her case was that the 19th century was behind her and the 20th century was ahead. When the 20th century would come, she would be 18 years, and in these 18 years she had seen a lot of life in England and London. She was aware about the neighborhood, she was aware about the family, she was aware about the bonding or lack of it within the family, and she also bore some very weird pressures from the family in which she lived. I refer to this because she was the daughter of a well-known intellectual of the 19th century, Leslie Stephen, a known name, and the person who would change opinion of others by his learned ways. And she was from his second wife, and it was out of the second marriage that she emerged as a child first. She had step brothers and sisters when she was born, and this created problems also. She had to, as a child of 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, she had to contend with the pressures that occur because children they share parentage, and those things sometimes create issues. She married Leonard Woolf, also a writer, also a thinker, in 1912, which means that when she married, she was 30 years old, and then she was opening eyes to a new kind of world. She would leave her parents' home and she would join Leonard Woolf, and then she would be called Virginia Woolf, taking the half name of the husband. And I referred to the 19th century at her background. So what kind of century did she leave behind? This is the question that I just want you to have in mind. The 19th century was marked by 2 or 3 very great intellectual trends. One trend was the evolution, and the other was the social thought or historical thought. And Darwin was there in the 19th century, and Darwin proved beyond doubt in scientific terms to the world of readership that human beings were not born as human beings. They were born as a form of life in the universe, and that life finally evolved into what became human, and the whole process would have taken millions of years. And when Darwin said this and proved it scientifically, then there was a furor in England and the whole of Europe that he was questioning the idea of Genesis, that God created the human being independently. That was not the case. He said that human being came from the natural process, and this was behind her. Therefore, she would be called a modern mind. She would not go into religion and into philosophy and into the idea of origins, but she would go into the idea of evolution. That was behind her, and that was her strength. The second thing was that there was Karl Marx from Germany. He was a European phenomena. He also lived in England a large part of his life, and he had set this trend of understanding things in terms of history and society. So there is Darwin, who talks about human being as a product of nature, natural forces evolving within the natural environment. And then you have Karl Marx, who is saying in the 19th century that the human being is determined by his labor in history. So he works, and in the work he is produced by that work. So he works, and the work also produces him. And then there are structures in society, and these structures come in the way of human development. But at the same time, said Karl Marx in the 19th century, that human beings being at the center of labor also brought about change. So the process, the traffic was two-way, it was not one-way. And these ideas were known to Virginia Woolf when she was a young woman in the last part of the 19th century. These things would form into her mind a structure of logic, a structure of thought. She would react to things keeping in mind the evolution and the social thought. And the third thing that I'll later on come to in some detail was that she saw some kind of difference and discrimination between men and women. This wasn't the case earlier. In the 19th century, everything was done by men or under their guidance, and women were on the periphery. Women were on the sides. So they would always seek guidance from males. But then, towards the end of the century, another kind of woman, the woman who could think independently, the woman who could question, the woman who could criticize and disagree with the male and present a different point of view, the woman who would assert herself because she could refer to the developments in science, logic, philosophy, and thought. And that woman had also entered, let's say, the domain of thought, and Virginia Woolf was lucky enough to be born at a time when these three developments, evolution, social thought, and being a woman, and being also later on a feminist, these things would work in the making of Virginia Woolf as a writer. She had occasional bouts of insanity. What is insanity? Abnormal behavior, because there must be a problem with the human being, with an individual. The individual cannot see things as they should be seen. But then insanity is a relative term. Who is insane? The person who talks nonsense. Now, the moment you say that somebody talks nonsense, then you have in your mind, the idea of sense. And the human being who is insane, is not able to understand things the way others understand. So what is the implication of insanity? The implication is that the majority of the people will decide for you what is sane. And because you are deviating from that idea of sanity, therefore you can be called insane. So there are people who use this term. And I don't want to go into the right or wrong of whether somebody is sane or insane, but then I tell you that it's an arbitrary word. And in any case, Virginia Woolf would shock people by her behavior. Maybe people think, only on the basis of what they see. But Virginia Woolf, at some points of time, when her mind was heightened in its sensitivity, then she could other things also. So maybe that was insane. Whatever the case, maybe there were some biographical reasons behind her supposed insanity. One instance comes to mind. It happened in the last decade of the 19th century when she was physically molested by her half-brother. and she was at that time 13 or 14 years. She didn't even understand what was happening to her, and he was taking liberties with her at the level of the body, and this perhaps broke her, and she didn't know how to react to this kind of a situation as a young woman. So maybe the first bout of insanity occurred at that time. But then if it is at all insanity, then it has some social factors to explain it. And when she marries, then she knows that she is not exactly normal. And she actually requires a husband who understands her problems, who sits with her, who loves her, who treats her with sympathy, who discusses things on the level of equality. And then, the company of the husband and wife on equal terms, that brings her back to the kind of understanding that will be useful for her to write. So she starts writing around the time in a serious manner. Of course, she wrote much earlier also, but in a serious manner she starts writing when she marries Leonard Woolf. Leonard Woolf himself is a writer, and he is a friend. He's more of a friend than a husband, and he understands her problems, and he gives her all the affection. In fact, this question should be also pointing towards the kind of company that they had. They had an intellectual company. They would sit together, they would discuss together, they would evolve their ideas together. Sometimes they would even write together. And later on, when both of them became writers, then they established a press, a printing press of their own, so that the problem of publication was also taken care of. And the name of the press that they founded in the small town of Hogarth, it is called the Hogarth Press. So there, Virginia Woolf's writings would finally be published. Then we come to the next point, which is she is one of the most innovative and experimental novelists of the 20th century. What is innovative? Innovative is untraditional, always thinking of something new, always trying to create something new, which is not established, which is not traditional. So she started, thinking of new ways of writing, new way of using words, new ways of composing sentences, new ways of communicating ideas. There is a direct way of communicating an idea, and there is an indirect way also. Sometimes you can imply an idea without saying it. that is an innovative method. And if you read her novels, you will find that sometimes what she says is not what she means. Sometimes she means the opposite, because there can be seen irony. More than irony, in her case, there is also the pictorial quality. She wants to capture an image. She doesn't want to bother about the sentence, the words. The words actually start creating pictures in the mind of the reader. So that is an innovation. So I just give you this example, that she is an innovative writer in the sense, that she takes liberties with the very skills of writing. The second thing is experimental. She also makes experiments with words. Sometimes you can join words which together will not make the kind of sense that we generally have about them, but then she starts weaving new patterns. She'll start maybe in the middle of a sentence. Sometimes she would say that it's not her view, it is somebody else's view. In fact, when I go further, I'll tell you that most of her writing, fictional writing, her novels are always things that occur not outside the characters but inside the characters. So what you see in the words that she uses, what you imagine in the words that she uses, a kind of reference, not an actual thing. She's not talking about an actual room. She's talking about a room that somebody sees at a particular time, and therefore she says, oh, he thought that thing was there in the room. When you say that he thought that there was something in the room, what do you make of it? Was it his thinking and there was nothing in the room, or was something there and he was thinking about that? So we are put into a kind of a doubt, a kind of a vague idea about the room that she would describe. So this kind of experiment excited the audience. They wanted to understand more about her concerns, about her themes, about her subjects. She died in 1941, and she died when she was about 60 years, and she had written quite a lot. In fact, she was a prolific writer, and she wrote not only novels, she also wrote critical prose, intellectual prose. Sometimes she would experiment, as I said earlier, that she was an experimental novelist. Sometimes she would experiment with biography. She is writing somebody's biography and it becomes a novel. So these experiments and all these things must have put a lot of pressure on her as an individual. And secondly, as I said, that she had that particular problem of heightened sense, because of which she would not be appearing normal to others. And it is said that in 1941, when she died, then she actually committed suicide. She went into the water and she drowned herself. So anyway, for us, Virginia Woolf is a person who thinks very sharply, very strongly, and who imagines, who doesn't bother about whether something is real or not. She thinks that something is real even if it is not. So these are the things that I thought I should explain to you so that you understand her nature as a writer. Then we go to the novels that she wrote. These are the major novels that she wrote. Just have a look at the important novels that are known all over the world today. Jacob's Room. Generally, people talk about mental states, talk about themes. Somebody's happiness, somebody's unhappiness, but she's talking about the room, a geographical entity. So Jacob's Room, not perhaps the courtyard, not perhaps the market, not perhaps the town, not perhaps the house, but the room. Then she has Mrs. Dalloway. Mrs. Dalloway straight away tells us that it's a strange kind of a novel. Think of the title of the novel, Mrs. Dalloway. What does it mean? Which means that there is no individual with the proper name. It's only somebody's wife she's talking about. See the irony. The irony is that there is a full-fledged woman. There is a woman who decides things for herself. A woman who thinks on her own behalf and on behalf of others, and she is critical enough. And she says no to some and yes to others. She marries according to her own wish. All these assertions are there in her, in Mrs. Dalloway. But then her name is not mentioned in the title. Her name is mentioned in the book. She is Clarissa Dalloway. But then here in the title she is Mrs. Dalloway. So which means that there is a problem with that woman called Clarissa, that she married a person and then she may or may not have enjoyed being a wife, being in matrimony, and she became more of a Mrs. than an individual. Now just see, very cleverly, very intelligently, Virginia Woolf is able to create a character who has no personality of her own, who has no identity of her own. You can't in a crowd say, well, this is Mrs. Dalloway, because if you name the person, then there is one kind of image that emerges. But if you call somebody Mrs. Dalloway, then it's somebody's wife. The next, this novel was written in 1925. To the Lighthouse was written in 27. Once again, the title is important. It's about the lighthouse. Once again, a place like Jacob's Room, and it's a specific kind of a place. It has some association with light. It has some association with guidance. It has some association with lightening up the areas of human life, the dark areas of human mind, and all those things. And a lighthouse gives different kind of directions to different people. Then you have The Waves in 1931. She writes a biography, Orlando, and if the famous essay, A Room of One's Own. I'll comment on this particular part of her career a bit more, because this tells us about the sensibility that she had. Imagine that she starts seriously writing, and all these writings are serious. They are well known, and a lot of critical analysis has taken place in English criticism about these books. Jacob's Room is published in 1922. Mrs. Dalloway is published in 1925. To the Lighthouse is published in 1927. The Waves is published in 1931. Orlando, 1928. The famous essay, A Room of One's Own, in 1929. What is common? most of these, in fact, all these works have been written in the 1920s. What is so special about the 1920s? By 1920, she would be 40 years, born in 1882, 18 years, and then in 1922 she is 40 years. So she becomes a serious writer, a writer worth mentioning in literary discussions and to give lectures on when she is 40. And there seems to be a kind of a spurt, creative spurt, that all these novels are written, and biography and even the critical prose essay, all these are written in a span of 10 or 12 years. What does it suggest? That she became active as a writer in these 20 years, in these 10-12 years. Now, one guess is that this particular period follows the ending of the First World War. First World War started in 1914 and it ended in 1917-18, and this was a very big event at the world level. This was the First World War. Before that, the whole world had not entered into that kind of attention. And there were battles, there were wars between countries, but never, at the level of the world. So the whole world was affected. And the other thing about the First World War is, and that is true also about the Second World War, and that takes place soon after this decade. When she dies, then the World War is on. She dies in 1941, and World War is going on. So that period, what do you think about the reality of the First World War? She must be reacting very sharply to the event of, to the incidents of, to the very happenings of the First World War. She must have been shaken by what happened in the First World War, and that perhaps created in her a sense of not merely criticism but also of a problem. And I say that there is a regular reference to the First World War in these novels, and particularly in Mrs. Dalloway, the novel that is most famous so far as she is concerned. And it has characters, who talk about the World War, who represent the World War, who remember the World War, who in a way see the World War as a kind of, determining factor. Then, then a writer of modernism. I'll come to that point of the First World War again towards the end of the lecture. But before that, let me tell you a few things about the concerns that Virginia Woolf had. Now, the first thing that comes to mind when we discuss is modernism. What is modernism? It assumes a distinct 20th century connotation with no link with the previous decades. Can it happen? What is the modern period for us? We who have read English literature, we start with Chaucer, we start with Spenser, then we come to Shakespeare, then we come to John Donne, then we come to Milton, then we come to the 18th century, then the 19th century, and we say that Chaucer is the first modern poet. Chaucer is born in the 14th century. He's writing in the 14th century. So if he's a modern poet in the 14th century, then what is modernism doing in the 20th century? This is the question that I pose to you, and this is the question that I want to ask myself also. Why should 20th century be called a modernist century? And I make this particular comment here. It assumes a distinct 20th century connotation with no link with the previous decades. So there is no modernism in the 19th century. There is no modern thought in the 18th century, in the 17th century, in the 16th century, and before. This is the question. So please start thinking about this question. Why should Virginia Woolf, who writes in the 20th century, be called a writer of modernism? I pose this question to you, and I say that if it has no link with Dickens, for instance, if it has no link with Shakespeare, it has no link with Milton, then what kind of modernism this is? So this is the question I pose. I'll try to answer it in my own way, but then I'm posing it to you for you to consider that she assumes that modernism of the 20th century is unlinked with anything that happened before. It is something that is problematic. Modernism is a counter to the humanist secular view. So humanist secular view is what? When human beings start thinking about their own dignity, about their own role in life, about how they become constructive and positive in life, when they become active agents of history, that is humanism. And all the great writers that we read in our syllabus in English literature are humanist writers. They put the human being at the center of their writing. Think of any novelist, think of any playwright, think of any poet. That poet in English literature would talk about the human being. It is the human voice that is at the center of it. And therefore, if something is countering humanism in the 20th century, that human beings are not important, now that's a new view. The second thing is the secular view. What is secular view? Secular has a lot of connotations, political as well as ideological. I don't want to go into them, but in the context of literature, secular view is that view which is related to the reality of history, the reality of the human behavior. That is secular. Scientific view also is secular view. Secular means of this world, of the world that actually exists, which has a kind of principle making it different from philosophical, different from divine. So in a way, secular view is critical of the divine. It is supporter of humanism and it's critical of the divine. And so far as modernism is concerned, that modernism which Virginia Woolf is supporting, that modernism will somehow go against the humanist secular view. So here we reach a kind of conclusion in this lecture that the 20th century modernism is the characteristic of writing in fiction, particularly by Virginia Woolf and another contemporary of hers, James Joyce, and that this has to be kept in mind.